Welcome everyone to Bankrupting Fraud virtual panel series. I'm here with Brett Johnson. So, Brett, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So, Patrice, I appreciate it. My name is Brett Johnson, former United States Most Wanted bad guy, now good guy. I work across the planet to help protect businesses and individuals from the type of person that I used to be. And recently I've been named Chief Criminal Officer for Arkose Labs. And we all know who Arkose Labs is. They are one of the fastest growing security companies on the planet, and they do an outstanding job about bankrupting fraud. So that's what we're talking about today.
Awesome. And I'm Patrice Boffa. I'm the Chief Customer Officer, and I work with Brett exactly about fighting fraud. So topic of today, before we jump into more panel discussions, how to move from fraud mitigation to deterrence. And Brett, I'm sure you have a lot to say about it, but maybe we can start here with some of the patterns that we see on. That's an example that we had from our customer, and we can see like the different attack patterns that attackers come and go. They test, they try, they pivot, and that's something that obviously I'm seeing by defending our customers. But you were on the other side, and you had a lot of experience, and you can tell us a little bit the story about like what it takes.
Well,
to perform those attacks.
I appreciate that, Patrice. And you're right. I had a lot of experience on the other side of the fence because I'm the guy that invented, I didn't invent. I started the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor of today's darknet and darknet markets, laid the foundation for the way modern financial cybercrime channels operate today. So I do have a unique insight to things like that. What I can tell you is that criminals, online crooks, cyber criminals, whatever you want to call them, they test everything. It's like a puzzle type environment. You try a technique, and if it works, you continue to do that technique until the company adapts to it. And at that point, you go back to the drawing board and you try something else. And you continually ping and ping and ping as long. And this is where Arkose comes in and the importance of Arkose's slogan of "We bankrupt fraud." A criminal will continue to do that as long as it's profitable for him to do so. So we're all about at Arkose, we're all about raising the cost of what it takes to commit crime against you or your organization. Criminals are very good. If you take, and I don't really care what type of fraud it is, it can be credit card fraud, it can be a bot attack, anything else like that. It costs money to do that. You have to find your target. You have to buy the tools. You have to buy the information lists that are going on. You sometimes have to buy browser fingerprints, maybe new devices. All these different types of things have a cost for the criminal side of things. And what we see here is we see criminals constantly trying to gain access, constantly trying to adapt to whatever new security is in place. And each adaptation that a criminal does costs money at the end of the day.
And funny enough, like all the red bars that we see here is exactly the same person. So we saw them coming in, and to your point, we see them adapting, trying tools, different techniques, and that's common pattern across our customer base.
Which, if you think about it, so you see what he's trying here. And here's what's important. Everybody needs to understand that each one of these attempts costs that criminal money. And the more attempts that he tries, the more expenditures he has. So if you could actually raise the cost of that, get to where, hey, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars or X amount of time, which equates to money, at that point, the fraudster looks for another target that doesn't have that type of problem for him accessing.
Yep, and that's exactly what we saw here. If you look at the rest of the timeline, pretty much everything is green and they end up walking away. So I think as we move on, and we touch a little bit on that about kind of like how we can approach that and how we can obviously detect and mitigate those attacks. I think something that we love to show here at Arkose is there is obviously kind of like the good and the bad, pretty much people that you know that are malicious, very easy to catch. You mentioned some of the tools, some of the basic tools are very easy to identify on our side. And then there is kind of the trusted signals, people that you really believe they're legit users. They can use multi-factor authentication. There's a bunch of things that we can do. And right in the middle, there is that gray area. And that's the hardest part, I guess, Brett, because that's where people hide.
That is exactly where people hide. It's kind of interesting. And a lot of the time when I'm talking, I talk more toward what the more experienced fraudsters are doing. People need to understand that most fraudsters are simply not experienced. They're not. They operate, and they're very easy to flag in that red section. But these more experienced people, they know they're not going to be all green. They're trying to avoid the red, and it's that gray area where they operate, that area where it's kind of anomalous, where you're not really sure what's going on. And that's the area of success for most cyber criminals. Arkose is extremely good at making sure that that gray area is very, very small. So that's what we do. But yeah, that's what you're seeing there is that gray area. And that gray area can be time, it can be a security product or tool that's in play, any number of things. But it's that area where most experienced cyber criminals really start to profit.
Awesome. And that's where we love your insight. And I think here we're really going back a little bit to what we mentioned before, kind of how the whole cycle of success happened. We talk a lot about the primary attacks in that slide. I think we see that when people find that it is effective, they're going to double down and they're going to go large scales. And then you were in that business. Like, you can walk us through how did you approach that? Because obviously we know your history at this point, but I assume that you were very successful at doing that. I not only assume, but obviously you were on the top wanted list, meaning that you were successful about doing that and you know how it gets done. So walk us through that, because I think that's the best part. I enjoy our conversations, but your expertise and your insights are obviously the best we can find here.
I appreciate that. So what's important to realize is that cyber criminals work together, and there's a reason they work together. There are 3 necessities to being successful at cybercrime. You have to steal the data, gather the data, you have to commit the crime, and then finally you have to be able to cash it out, put literal cash in pocket. If you can't do all 3 things, you fail. The problem is that a single attacker cannot do all 3 things. There's a skill gap. He doesn't know how to do one of those necessities. Or there's a problem with geographic location. He's simply in a geographic area that prohibits one of those things, typically money laundering. So because of that, criminals work together, but it's more than just networking and working together. They also share and exchange information. So some of these criminal communities these days are millions of members large, millions of criminals looking to victimize you, your organization, and they share information among each other. So you have one group of people or one person that has an exploit or knows of a vulnerability on a website. He will share that with his internal group of people, his friends, his associates. He will share that, and they will work together to hit and victimize that specific website, that target. All right. Once they mine it out as much as they possibly can, they will share it within the community at large. So now you've got millions of people that know about that vulnerability that are seeking to profit by victimizing you or your organization. And what happens is typically what happens, a criminal starts, he knows of a target, he knows of a vulnerability. The more experienced criminals, they'll come in and they'll start testing, and you'll see these pings start to pop up. And when we look back at breaches, data thefts, everything else, you see this that has went on. A criminal comes in, he waits in the system, he looks around, he starts to implement what he's going to do. He makes sure his operational security is good, that he's going to be anonymous. He makes sure the withdrawal mechanism is there, that he can walk away without being identified, that he can profit, everything else. So you see these preliminary test runs, and then finally it starts to ramp up a little bit more. Then finally criminals start to automate these attacks, and that's when it goes like a wildfire throughout your entire system and causes, depending on the attack, millions, if it's a nation state attack, billions worth of damage. So that's what happens here. You've got criminals that are working together, that are collaborating, that are sharing information, and it gets even better than that from the criminal side. It gets even better that a lot of the products and tools are off-the-shelf products and tools. They're legitimate products that are just repurposed for criminal activities. So that all those things together is the reason that cybercrime tends to really be successful from the cyber criminal part of things. And when you've got a company like, I hate to say it again, but when you've got a company like Arkose that understands that if we can really raise the cost of what it takes to commit crime, these criminals will seek other targets. That's exactly what happens.
Awesome. And that's actually a good segue, because there are a couple of things that you mentioned that are quite interesting. I think one is, obviously, I believe that companies that have large budgets get access to the early information, and they're able to kind of like take steps to prevent that exposure. So I think there's a little bit of unfairness depending on your company size and your investment in cybersecurity and how much you're exposed from that perspective. But as you mentioned as well, like that has a cost for the fraudsters. And what we see here is exactly that balance, meaning that if you have a significant budget and you have a focus on your cybersecurity efforts, and hopefully you don't have too much surface to defend, you might be still be able to win the battle. But I think that based on what you mentioned, like there are some other companies that either don't have the expertise, the focus, or the pockets to defend themselves, and they seem to be a little bit kind of like the sweet spot for a lot of the attackers as well.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that attack surface. When you think about it, here's some stats for you to scare everyone to death. 90% of every single attack uses known exploits. 90%. It's not 0 days. It's not unknown vulnerabilities. It's typically the things that cybersecurity and security professionals have been talking about for years that have not been addressed, that causes a lot of the threat landscape that's out there. 41% of every single router has the default password. That's whether you're at home or in a financial institution. 41% of all routers on the planet default password. That doesn't even account for the billions of IoT devices out there where a lot of the time you can't even change the password on those things. So you've got all these different statistics that are in play that creates this threat landscape. Criminals know that. They work on that. They profit by knowing those types of statistics. So it becomes very important that you make sure that you're plugging every single hole that you can, that you're taking that holistic approach to security. Are you looking at bot traffic? Are you looking at the entire data set of everything that's going on with each session that's coming in? Are you aware of your environment? Do you have that environmental situational awareness in your system? Because if you don't, criminals will win. Criminals, and again, it's really about raising the cost. So if I'm committing crime, I have to spend money on the accounts. I have to spend money on the fingerprints. I have to spend money on the devices. I have to spend money on the IP addresses. There's all these different avenues where me as a criminal operating, I have to expend money. My effort takes time. And for a criminal, that time also equates to money. That's why you see more and more criminals using bots these days. Bots have been around for a while, but right now, bot traffic is going absolutely insane through the roof because now criminals are starting to understand the real profitability on that. They knew it before, at least the more expert ones did, but now you've got platforms that are in play that allow criminals that really don't understand how bots operate or anything else. Now they can use these bots and be profitable with these bots. So that's a lot of the problem that's going on, is you have to have security in play that's able to identify these attacks, stop these attacks, and also raise the cost on the criminal side of things.
Awesome. Love your insights there, Brett. So obviously we talk a little bit of everything here, and that's just a little bit of a summary, but understanding the motivation, I think you covered that, which is people are here to make money. And
99% are cash based. Absolutely.
I think we talked about it, kind of like identifying the telltale signals of fraud. Those are going back to the first line, the attempts. What are the initial cycles? People are going to test, they're going to pivot, they're going to find wherever they can address that. And I think as we keep going, like there is the Arkose approach comes into play, which is how you segment the traffic based on the risk profile. And that's something that we're doing more and more. We announced the launch of our Detect product this week that is really focusing on that. What are the signals that are going to give insight that something might be going on? And it's, to your point, like people are going to try, and they try all day long. And if they have the feeling that they're going to be successful, they're going to double down. So that's one of the key principles on our side. And then, as you mentioned, like you talk a lot about the bots, but that's obviously the easy ones to catch when we're looking at the differentiators, bots versus human fraud farms and good users. Like that's really the whole gray zone, and where people are going to hide, and how we can identify and take specific actions based on those. And based on your experience, I think that if you have seen all the tools and all the different approaches, how do you think that we can do, or in general, companies can do a better job at that? Because that really seems to be like the hard part to figure out, like more and more traffic, gray zone. You talk about the marketplace, the fact that people can flip their fingerprints, they can use proxies. Like that seems to be really the core issue that we're having right now.
Sure. And you know, how do you get better at security? The first is you have to realize that you have a security issue. You do. I've dealt with a lot of companies in the past where they're aware of cybersecurity issues, but they don't realize they've been victimized yet, or they've not been breached yet. So they keep putting that on the back burner. An attack is never a question of if, it's a question of when. It's going to happen. And typically it's already happening. You just don't know it yet because you're not looking at all the data that you need to look at. The stuff like Arkose Detect will show you. So you're not being given that snapshot that shows you what's happening in your system. What I like to say is that you need to understand your place in the cybercrime spectrum because you have one. If you have a product or service that makes money, a criminal can and will make money off that same product or service. The way a criminal will attack you depends on who you are and what you do. So understand that. Determine what a criminal is looking for in your environment and design security around that. And security should always show you that data that's in that system. You need to know what's going on in your system. You need this tool in place. Arkose Detect is very good about giving that specifically that snapshot in that gray environment. This is what's happening here. Can you see any type of anomalies that pop up that you need to flag? Well, yes, you can. Arkose does that for you. So all these things in place help to deter these types of fraud attacks, but you have to put them in place. You have to realize that you do have an issue. Just because you've not been a victim of a major breach yet doesn't mean you're not going to. It's coming. Think of it as the worst lottery in the world. Right now, there's just not enough cyber criminals that they've gotten to you yet, but they're coming. I promise you, they're on their way.
Awesome. Brad, as always, enjoy the conversation, and obviously picking up your knowledge on all those issues. Like moving next, there is our panel. You can see a lot of great profiles, and that's going to be moderated by Richard, our CRO. Thanks again, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrice.